Thank you for joining today's webinar, everyone. Today's webinar is on Hook 'em with Value-Based Stories, Compliments of ValueSelling Associates. My name is Carlos Nouche. I'm going to be your guide through the content, and I wanted to go over just a couple of housekeeping items. First, today's session is being recorded and will be available on demand within a few hours. Also, I'm happy to address your questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to type them in throughout the session. We'll just kind of group them all together because some of them repeat, and we'll answer them all at the end. Feel free to look for that Q&A window on the left-hand corner of the screen. In fact, for those that haven't already, feel free to type in your location today. It's always interesting to see since we have folks from around the world that join us. That being said, how about we get started? When preparing for this webinar, look, one of the things I was trying to do is trying to really understand value-based stories or storytelling as a skill set or tool to use when engaging in these conversations. And one of the things I kind of came up with is some of the best reps out there are great storytellers. In fact, they have an ability to share information and ask questions that the buyer can clearly relate with versus simply talking about products or solutions or hardware and what they're all about. So in engaging with folks, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if we leverage these stories and kind of share them with everyone? In our workshops, you might remember we talk about these as credibility introductions, which are fantastic, and they're initially used to create credibility early on in the conversation. In other words, hey, those first 30 seconds, how are we going to hook them and get them engaged in the conversation to get started? So in thinking about that, I thought, wouldn't it be great to kind of share with you some examples? And I've done some of this work with some of my clients as well, and I thought it was really valuable. So if we think about today's session, I kind of wanted to break it down into three buckets. First of all, what are these value-based stories? Secondly, how do I create them? And then lastly, how am I able to deliver them and deliver them with confidence? Especially if I'm new to the organization and I wasn't around when a lot of these accounts were sold originally. So we'll walk through this, but to get us started, the first thing we're going to do is, how about we take a little survey? A lot of these stories are even more important when we start engaging with an executive buyer. So we got past that gatekeeper, that manager, that director, and we're in front of the executive buyer, and I'm just curious. What percentage of sales meetings with executive buyers do they consider valuable? Not that we consider valuable, but they themselves feel these are valuable to us. And if you could, right on your screen, you're able to select, is it 60 or more? Is it 40 to 60? Is it 20 to 40? Or is it 20 or less? And hit that submit button. I'll give you all a couple of seconds to do that. Fantastic. Great. See them coming in. All right, let's take a little gander. And guys, you're really good because most of you said 20 or less. Now, isn't that surprising to you? I mean, think about it. The actual number is 19. What that means is 1 out of 20 meetings with executives, the actual executive walks out of there going, this was worth my time. Man, think about it. You're going to be on sales calls later on this week or next. Are your meetings going to be that 1 out of 20? 1 out of 5? Or is it going to be one of the 4 out of 5? So when we think about these things, I think what makes them more valuable is when we prepare for them and we get more involved with them. Now think about it. We spend a lot of time getting past that gatekeeper, that manager or director to try to get in the door. And when we do get in the door, sometimes the person across the table, and I'm sure you've all been there, they look at you, they got their arms crossed, and you hear the, I don't know you. I don't know your company. I don't know your products. I don't know what you stand for. I don't know your record. But go ahead. Tell me. Man, that's a terrible feeling, isn't it? And sometimes we'll just go with the, well, let me tell you how I am the leading provider of. And you can just tell that conversation is just sinking. So how do we captivate these individuals? How do we talk to them in a way that allows them to know that we know their business, we know some of the best practices in their businesses, and best of all, we've accomplished some great results, outcomes of value for others like them that they can really relate to. In fact, if we've done our homework enough, we can pick ones that quite possibly may be the same type of situations that they're dealing with today. It really demonstrates that we've done our homework, we have an understanding of their business, and we can get them there. So how do we do that, right? So how do we prepare these value-based stories? Well, guys, I kind of broke up this thought process into 3 buckets. And I think the first one we got to take some ownership for is before we ever show up and throw up, we got to be armed. And we're armed by doing our research and understanding their business, their industry. Now, here's my quick little tip. If they're a public company, and guys, I'll tell you, I am the laziest salesperson alive. I love to listen to, not read, but listen to their analyst call. The first part of the call gives you all the great stats and figures and numbers that you need, and I might listen to it and I might write them down, or I might highlight it in the printed script that I have in front of me. But I'm listening to the call because I want to hear the tone. I want to hear the voices of those executives and their tone in describing what has just happened that quarter. But then you can't hang up yet. The good part's coming. It's all the analyst questions. And it's almost comical. They start off with, well, great job on the quarter there, Chris. But, when you said you grew sales by 20% as expected, what percentage of those new sales were based on new clients? You almost hear the pause at the other end of the phone, the shuffling of the paper maybe. Wait a minute, I got this one. And then you get their response. And what I mean by that, you're starting to uncover some real business issues that these accounts are dealing with that are critical at the executive level. And they may describe, okay, for this quarter or for the coming year, here's our plans to rectify that. Why is that so important? Well, whatever your project is within the organization, whether it's services or products or hardware, hey, you want to align your project to some of these critical business issues that they're dealing with. Not some Band-Aid issue at the bottom that's just a little problem for the minion, but some of these critical business issues that are going to get them to actually react and take action. Now, within this same category, you notice I said research and business acumen. What I mean by that is this. Look, every company out there worries about money coming in and money going out. They just don't always just call it revenue and costs. For example, for one of our clients, they were selling to hospitals. And in engaging and selling to hospitals, they care about money coming in, but they don't necessarily just call them revenue. They call them reimbursements. And I learned the reason for that is because what a hospital does is it provides a service and gets reimbursed primarily through insurance companies. In fact, here in the U.S., over 40% of it is reimbursed by the U.S. government, the biggest insurer out there. So that understanding of their terminology can make or break you in that conversation. If I just simply said, well, of course you're concerned about rising revenues, that isn't necessarily going to relate to someone in that industry. Let's make sure that when we listened to and did our research, not only did we get a lot of facts and figures and key information, but we also can articulate it in a way that this individual can relate to. We're using their business terms. That's going to lend a lot more credibility to your story and to you. Then you get all this great content. Can we come back to and create a value-based story that actually relates to it? Have we addressed problems like this before as a company? Do we have some customers that had similar situations or are in similar industries? Can we kind of figure out what were their business issues? How did they articulate it? What were the underlying problems they cared about? In fact, I'm going to pick this one and this one because based on my research, these are the most critical ones for this account that I've come up with so far. And then the last part, what was the outcome, result? Don't tell me they successfully implemented or they went live or they're able to aggregate more data or they have dashboards. Who cares? What I really want to know was what's the measurable outcome that they had, right? If they were able to have dashboards, great, that's a great solution. What did they do with them? Through that, they were able to have better accuracy. Great, how much more accuracy? Through that, they were able to be more productive. Great, how much more productivity? How did they measure it? That is really some of the key parts to those success stories. In fact, when I practice these with my teams in our workshops, I always ask the class, what's the most captivating part of that story that you just heard? And every single time, they'll jump to the measurable value. Now, what makes it even more captivating is the fact that we built some credibility to get there. But if it's not measurable, the story falls flat. It sounds, and no offense to marketing, but it sounds like a marketing brochure. Hey, we help 70% of the companies out there be successful. So what? And wow, I hope I don't fall into that 30%. So we need to, the more measurable it is, the better the story will be. Now, half the battle, in my opinion, is getting this content and having the story. The other half is, can you now tell the story in a way that you sound confident, in a way that you sound credible, in a way that it's your story, not something you read from a piece of paper or a slide that you got in the office. And whether you're the original sales rep that sold it or not, whether you were even at that company when it happened, practice the story. Write it out, have your own transitions, and try to create your very own 30-second story behind this thing to try to get them to engage, right? Because if you think about the slide prior, that person that we talked to that's, hey, has got all those questions, how much time do we really have with them, right? Is it a minute? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 30 seconds? There's a lot of research out there, and what I've found is, look, people are making impressions of you right off the start, even before you open your mouth. So obviously, hopefully you dressed for success in a way that related to this industry. Hopefully you looked the part. Hopefully you combed your hair or shaved your head that day and you look good and clean. But let's say we got past the basics. Now you got 30 seconds. What are the first things you're going to talk about in that meeting? Is it going to be all about you and your company, or is it going to be about some content that's about them and they can relate to? Now, a lot of times I go to companies and go, well, Carlos, we don't have any of these. Really? Because I looked at your website, I talked to some of your people internally. You got some happy customers. In fact, for one of the accounts I talked to recently, they had over 15,000 clients out there and a over 90-some-odd% renewal rate. There's a lot of great content out there. We're just not leveraging it. So sometimes, look, put on your new value selling goggles, go look at the content, go have some conversations internally, and I'll bet you'll find some great stories that are out there. Now let's have another little survey. So we're engaging with these accounts. We got a little bit limited window of time, and there's some research out there, and sometimes you guys may even say controversial research out there that makes this even tougher. What percentage of the buying decision have executives already made before having that conversation with you? In other words, how much homework research have they already done before they even engage with you? Is it 60%, 50%, 20%, 10%? I'll give you a little time to answer, and if you could, just click on the screen, hit that submit button for me, and I'll have those calculated out. Great job. I appreciate it. All right. Seems we're a little over a place, but it's settling down on two primary answers, the 50 and the 60. Well, let me tell you what the answer was. Based on a Harvard Business Review, they analyzed and came up with that nearly 60% of the typical purchasing decision is already made before ever having that initial conversation with the supplier. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, there's also some maybe contradictory research out there from SiriusDecisions, and I was meeting with them last year, and they talked about the fact that, hey, when we surveyed good reps that are very successful, they are engaging early, middle, and late in the sales cycle. They're not waiting for the customer to have all this data. Now, whether you lean on one side or the other, here's the facts. I think we can all agree that there is more information out there than ever. The Google machine out there gives us access to more data than ever before, and these gatekeepers and buyers and executives can get information from so many more places before they engage with us. And they start making some conclusions based on their own prior experiences and what they read out there. Not always real or the right conclusions, but they start making some. And the other key factor out there, also based on research, is those buying windows seem to be getting shorter. They're trying to get us through the process much quicker. We've done our research. Just go ahead, show me your stuff. And that doesn't always succeed, because what we're going to show, we have no idea matches to what they are expecting or trying to drive. So we need to execute our sales campaign aligned to their buying process much quicker. And I think that these value-based stories are a great way to do that, because you can use it as a tool to create credibility, but you can also use it as a tool around some of your questions. So before I show you the stuff, the really good stuff, how about, can I just ask you a couple of questions? For example, one thing I see a lot of companies struggling with is X. This new regulatory compliance coming down the road is really affecting a lot of organizations like yours. Have you thought about how are you going to address it? Do you have a plan today to address it? Are you concerned about your ability to address this new regulatory compliance? In doing so, you lend yourself a lot more credibility. And the reality is this. When you're engaging in these accounts, executives usually engage very early in these conversations. Unfortunately, a lot of reps engage very much in the middle of these conversations. So where the executive engagement, it's at its lowest points. If you find yourself there, diagnose the deal and decide, look, either I'm going to take a step back, ask some much tougher questions of my gatekeeper so that I can get some access to the executives, or my deal is at risk because there's some direction set for this deal, and my underlings that I'm dealing right now may not know the entire truth. In talking about executives, here's some additional resources. If you're going to go have a conversation with them and you want to relate to them, what's key? Well, look, the things they do is they're held accountable and responsible for achieving the business goals and objectives of the business. That's how I look at it. So if you're going to go talk to them, yes, that measurable value is key, but also is your understanding of the goals and objectives of this organization. And have you solved those in similar companies, similar sized organizations, so they can relate to these things? In other words, you're becoming your own little reference, right? Without someone else referencing into the account, you're providing that level of confidence into these accounts. So we engage with them, and they look us in the eye. What do they want? What do they want? What do you want to accomplish in those initial 30 seconds? here's a laundry list. Our experience, our knowledge, we're professional, we're credible, we're candid, we're likable. Oh, the famous, we're a trusted advisor. Well, reading out a brochure to them isn't going to do it. Telling them how we're the leading provider of isn't going to do it. Sure, maybe when we've built the perfect mousetrap and we're early in the market and everybody buys from us just because we're cool, life is good. But once you get past that and you got to go really sell someone, real salespeople need to get involved. And that's when you need to make sure that you can piece these stories together to get them there. So it all starts, in my mind, with the research. And what I wanted to try to do is just kind of pick some categories of where you can get some of this research, right? And you can read this faster than I can read it to you, but to me, one of the best sources for information are your own customers. If you're selling the VP of in these organizations, can we go talk to another VP of in existing clients and have a conversation with them? If you're a new rep in an organization today and you got a new territory, my advice to you is being new only lasts so long. So go find those happy customers in your territory and go have, instead of the usual Barney lunch, the one where you tell them you like them and they tell you they like you and you say, don't worry, I got the check. How about you have a little conversation about, hey, what was life like before you bought our products? I know I wasn't here, but I just want to have a better understanding. And what's life like now after? What problems were you having before? How did it affect your business? And then lastly, what's been the measurable impact results that we've gotten? Guys, it's going to have two big impacts, and one of which you probably didn't think about. The first one, obviously, it's for us. We're going to start building those reference stories, whether they're given to us or not. But better yet, we've heard it right from the source. Even though we weren't the person there, we're going to start gaining a lot of confidence because we know the individual that this was impacted of, and we heard it right from them. We saw their own passion and excitement. We heard their terminology they use in describing the situation. The other big benefit that I think most people don't think about is, hey, that person across the table, they're working at an organization. They're trying to do the right things. They're measured by MBOs. And every year they're being asked to kind of measure their impact to the organization. Sometimes they have a hard time doing it because it's kind of selling yourself. And that's not what their role is. And it may not be their personality. But by having this conversation with you, they walk out of there going, man, we were in a bad shape a year ago. We're in a much better shape today. And I've had some real impact to the organization. And that's where I see the manager become the director become the senior director become the VP become the CIO or CXO or whatever. And part of the reason they got there is because of their business relationship with you. And in doing so, they're going to constantly seek you out to work with you because you've now become part of their success. So something to think about, and a great thing that I found in my career in kind of building these things out. So let's get down to brass tacks. If I'm creating a success story, what should it have? What should it look like? What should be in it? Well, first off, guys, you got to make sure you're creating the success story for the right contact, the right audience. You wouldn't go to a manager and tell them, hey, I worked with another organization and we were able to show how we could eliminate about 70% of the people in your job. Aren't you excited? I mean, they're going to look at you cross-eyed. You've just totally gone against their own personal value in the organization. So what I mean by right level, right contact is let's make sure we're telling a story to someone that they care about. So if it's a business case and it's meant for business users, let's not use it with IT. If it's a very technical problems and technical issues, let's not use that with the business. Let's make sure we're using that with IT. Then what should be in it? Well, first off, guys, it should be the underlying top-level business issues that we're dealing with. So as an organization, they were trying to raise revenue by 30%. As an organization, they were trying to lower their OpEx by 30% over the next 3 years. They were trying to improve their customer sat by X by this date. They were trying to improve patient satisfaction scores by 10% in the next 15 months. The more measurable it is, the more credible it is. This is not talking out of school. Notice I didn't mention any company name. This is saying, hey, I have this client in this industry that's similar to yours with this specific outcome, and hopefully I picked a business issue based on my research that they relate to. Second, number two, in digging under the covers, what we uncovered, the three things that were getting in the way for them was problem one, problem two, and problem three. And these challenges were the things that we saw were the things that were getting in the way of their ability to accomplish that in that timely fashion they were looking for. The more articulate you are about the problem, the better connection. But remember, we're trying to keep this within 30 seconds. Part three. They used us, that was it, and here's what were the outcomes, the value, the impact to the organization. In working with us, this is what were the results, and those folks need to be measurable. They were able to see patient satisfaction scores increase by 12% in 8 months. They were able to see a reduction in their capital expenditures by X% in this time frame. Hey, we were able to see that reduction because we took 2,000 servers and we were able to not have to buy or renew or address 10% of them. That's 200 servers at X costs to get this result. Again, you need to understand your numbers as well, right? What was the math to get there? That helps a lot with this credibility. And in doing so, I think you're going to be able to create that credibility, show that experience, show that you're professional, trustworthy, and knowledgeable in these accounts, right? Because you're telling a story they can relate to. And obviously at the end of it, I love for you to end it not in a statement, but in a question. In other words, hey, in researching your company or in talking to some of the folks in your team, my understanding is you're facing a similar situation. But I don't want to assume that. I really would love your feedback. You know, what are some of your top of mind business drivers that this project that we're talking about needs to relate to or address? Hopefully you caught that little nuance at the end on your transition. So, what makes a great value-based story? Well, it's not only the content, it is also your delivery. And to get ready for that delivery, there's a great little tool. We talk about using these value prompters. And guys, they're a great way to kind of structure the content. So number one up there, who's the contact, the title we're working with. Number two up there, what was their business issue? What was a critical business driver they were dealing with that we needed to address? Three, what were those underlying problems? Notice the big X on solution. In that initial 30 to 60 seconds, what we implemented and how it worked and what were the feature functions does not matter. It doesn't add any value to the story. In fact, it just takes away from it. So skip that and jump right to number four. What was the measurable impact, the results that we had? And if you don't know what they were, pick up the phone, talk to the partner, talk to someone in your organization, and try to figure out what those numbers are. More importantly, how are they measured? Because if I can figure out the math, I don't just have one reference. I have the ability to do the math and get it across 1,000 references. Now, let's go back to a little more research. When trying to engage executives, if I take your eyes and if you look at the bottom one, the thing that is the least effective, not to say it's not effective, but it's the least effective, is just flat out direct cold calling the account and spewing all our marketing stuff on them. What is the most effective, and you can relate to this just, you know, from your own managing your own homes and taking advice of a good painter or a good roofer, is a reference. Now, in business, an internal reference trumps an external reference, but I think that all just depends on who's giving the reference and who do you trust. But a reference. Now, obviously, look, I'm in the reference business, and I would argue so are you. If you make your customers happy, they'll be more apt to tell others, and in doing so, more leads will come your way. So in this case, can we use a reference stories so when we engage with these executives, we can talk about the things they care about. Even if we weren't referred to them, we can leverage them. But I even go a step further. I get engaged with someone or introduced to someone, and I go, hey, do you mind doing an email introduction? So I get a warm introduction in. And they'll sometimes go, oh, yeah, no problem. Hey, would you like me to give you some context so that when you do give the warm introduction, it's something they can better relate to? Now, you could change it and make it all what you want, and I will literally type up for them that little reference story based on my little understanding of the business and give them some context. The other thing is, let's say I don't have a warm introduction, then I will use the reference story to start creating some credibility for myself, right? So as we do this, guys, you got to ask yourself, is this worth your effort? Anything we do today, I got to tell you, my most precious asset is time. And we spent about a little bit over 30 minutes together so far. And you got to ask yourself, is this worth my time? And I got to tell you, number one, research shows 82% of salespeople are simply not aligned to the needs of the buyer. They're pitching product. They're not having conversations with their customers. They're not aligning what they're selling and their solutions to the business and needs of those buyers. I know it sounds so simple, but the research shows it is still very prevalent out there. Number two, stories are flat out much more memorable. So when you think about having conversations and you look at some of the best reps you ever met, a lot of them are the best storytellers ever. These aren't made up stories. These are telling a story about a situation that someone can relate to, kind of internalize, and in doing so, it creates interest to talk more. Now, I put a lot of pressure. These stories also required some research, some time. Why? Well, because reps that are successful spend 25% more time preparing for these things. They don't wing it, guys. They prepare the questions, they prepare the stories, and they try to execute. And what I have found, it is a snowball effect, because if I prepare for one account in one industry, I can go back into that industry and leverage a lot of that over and over again. And in having this type of conversation, my customers a lot of times educate me. Don't be that guy that's just pitching product, right? Here's some other research. 71% of salespeople simply talk about product, and I see it all the time. One thing, a little pet peeve of mine, sometimes people call it, well, this is your pitch, right? And I go, right off the bat, when you called it a pitch, it just sounds something that has no feeling, and it's the same stuff over and over again. I want it to be tailored to them, and sure, I may have 3 to 5 great reference stories that I sometimes tell in 20 seconds and I sometimes tell in a minute and a half, depending on the situation. But I'm telling it with compassion, and a lot of that comes with practice. Here's an interesting little quote I wanted to drag in. We're all familiar with Albert Einstein, and when asked if given 1 hour to save the planet, he said he would spend 59 minutes defining the problems and only 1 minute resolving it. Why is this important? Guys, how many times do we go in, we hear a couple of key phrases, and we jump right into resolving it with our products, services, solutions, what have you? What if we just take a step back and try to truly understand them a little bit better? Now, I know I got some people out there going, dude, I've heard this 1,000 times. I know exactly what it is. But realize you've heard it 1,000 times. That buyer has only said it once. And it's more important for that buyer to kind of get through that conversation, to have that therapy, to get through that discovery with you. And in doing so, it's going to lend you so much more credibility than just telling them. Now, we talked about confidence earlier, so I kind of wanted to pull out a definition, and you could read this better than I can or faster than I can, but I'm going to point your eyes to the last one. A feeling of self-assurance arising from one's appreciation of one's own abilities and qualities. So, guys, can we tell these stories in a way that it truly demonstrates our confidence not only in ourselves but in our company? And I took a little Olympic picture because they're coming up, and there's a great example of individuals that have been working for something probably the majority of their lives, and they've been doing their sport for a long time. But I'm telling you, today they're probably practicing that sport to get ready for that event. So the best thing you can do to gain confidence is you got to practice that skill set. And towards that end, look, this whole time together is useless if you don't do anything with it. No actions, no results. So what are you going to start doing, keep doing, or stop doing to engage yourself, to get you to that next level? Here's some ideas. Maybe you need to go out and go meet with some of those great client wins and pull out of them some of the success criteria that we talked about. Leverage some of the format that I gave you before. In establishing this credibility, create some of these success stories for yourself. Share them with some of your coworkers, right? Maybe get them to do one, you do one, and wow, now you got two to go forward. And then don't forget to spend the time practicing. You can't just show up in the lobby and spill all your candy. You got to practice it a little bit. Practice it in the mirror, practice it with your coworker, practice it with your manager, practice it on your dog. One of my little tricks is I like to practice it under pressure. I'm running on the treadmill, my heart's beating, I'm telling the story in my head. Man, when I'm in front of the client, I could pass out. I'll still be telling that story because I practice it under pressure and I have a lot of conviction. I know what points I really want to emphasize and what points I just kind of want to skate by. So with that, guys, hey, what are some of the questions you may have out there? And let me look through here the list. We got a couple more coming in. Give me a second to kind of read a couple of these. All right, so one of the questions we got, do we need to mention the customer's name in the story? Absolutely not. And I'll be honest with you, we talk about this a lot in my workshops. People will go, should we or shouldn't we? And we could arm wrestle for hours on this thing. I think it really depends on the industry and the business that you're in. If you're selling, for example, cities or counties or school districts, hey, in that segment of the market, they love to know that other cities, counties, and school districts are using your product and are using it successfully. In fact, you've gotten through the gauntlet of whatever their procurement process is. So it's very beneficial to use some names. However, there's the flip side of it. Hey, if I'm selling Coke, the last thing you want to do is talk about how much great work you've done at Pepsi. If you're selling American Express, they don't want to know what you've done for Visa. And they're very sensitive because they're very brand loyal. So look, at the end of the day, what I try to do is not use the company name. And if you tell me you're in an industry where you should, God bless you, that's your call. Go knock it out. All right, here's a good question. Does a story have to be real? Yes, I'm not asking you to lie. I don't want you to make these up. Remember, we're trying to gain credibility through this thing. Now, if you tell me, well, I don't have any successful customers or it's really hard to get, well, at least try to understand what areas of the business you affect, and in affecting it, what would be the simple math of impact. But I don't want you to make up a story. Absolutely not. All right, let me see here. All right, these next two are kind of very similar. What if I don't have any real testimonials because I'm new to this market? Or what if I'm new to sales and I don't have all these great stories like a senior sales rep? Guys, let me remind you, you're new to the company, but the company may not be necessarily new. Even a startup has some run rate. So who's rolled it out and why? And let's go have a conversation with them. If that doesn't work, I'll give you another great easy idea. When I got into this business over 8 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting someone in sales enablement for a very large company. Now, they didn't even roll out value selling, I'll tell you, but they were retiring, and through a friend of a friend, we had lunch. And my questions to them is what they thought made a great program, what made it successful. And still till today, I use some of that information in my stories on how to drive a deal. And I give them credit for it. All right, All right, here's another question. What pieces of the story are critical? I think I kind of broke that up for you. I think we got to have, if you know what level you're giving it to, the 3 critical pieces are, do we understand their critical business issue? Now notice it's business issue in their terminology, not feature function, not us. It's what's going on in that industry, in that business. 2, what are the underlying problems? And again, the more you can articulate the problem, the better off. Now these are struggling with, impact of, concerned about. These are not feature. They like to have, the requirement is. These are really problems they're having. And the third, and probably the most critical part, because it's always the zinger at the end, what was that measurable impact or value? All right, let's do a couple more and then we'll close out the call. Does it have to be in 30 seconds? No. I think that's, the 30 seconds is my way to make sure I'm crisp to the point. But do realize, more than a minute, you're doing a lot of talking and you're expecting them to do a lot of listening without any interaction. So when I write out my stories, I do try to make them, or not 30 seconds, I do sometimes times them. In fact, at one of a sales kickoff we did recently, we had a great competition where at each table we had stopwatches and we timed the conversations, and then we even had a competition for a winning value-based story. But out of it, we got a whole bunch of them that were great. Do you have some examples of effective value-based stories? Well, my examples will only be mine, but so if you want to sell some value selling, God bless you, that'd be great. But let me give you an example of a real one, and hopefully you can see the pieces and parts like we talked about earlier. We worked with an account out of Chicago, and in their situation, they were trying to double the size of the business in the next 2 years. Now, to put a little bit more finer point on it, they were struggling. They had great technology without a purpose. They were going after every single market, every single opportunity that moved, and they were really struggling in making that happen. In working with us, they refined their approach, and here were the flat-out outcomes. They doubled their deal size in the first 6 months, tripled it in 9 months, and did not miss a quarter 7 quarters straight. And the only reason I'm stopping at 7 quarters is individually that VP of sales did so great, he ended up moving on to another organization where we've worked with him again. And those are the same types of results I'd love to get for others out there. Now, again, I don't mean this to make this self-serving. I just trying to give you an example, and the only ones I got are my success stories. But hopefully you heard the business issue, the problems, and the value within it that were measurable. All right. That being said, let's close this thing out. Everyone, just so you're aware, following today's webinar, the content will be available on demand, and you can download the slides and information. It will be under our resources, webinars, and I encourage you to go out there and take a look. I also would love you to go visit our e-store where we have books, white papers, and other content that could help you in your own careers. In fact, including some complimentary content into our library like prior webinars and newsletters. And just to put it on your radar, we have 2 upcoming webinars coming up. The first one on June 3rd is in APAC. That's 1 p.m. Australian time. And the one on June 23rd, that's 10 a.m. Pacific. I really hope you can join us or listen to one of the calls afterwards. We really look forward to getting your feedback, guys. We open up a number of different ways. Feel free to reach out to me personally, reach out through the organization, and we'd love to know how we can help you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really look forward to your continued questions. And hey, I'd love to hear some of your great success stories and what they've meant for you. Thank you, and have a great day.